Okay, so I am Dr. Sandra Miles, and I'm really excited to be here. I'm the founder of a consulting organization called the DSM Initiatives. So I work with a lot of leaders and organizations and training on having difficult conversations, talking about diversity, thinking about diversity in new ways. And so hopefully that's the conversation that we will have today. So not to be patronizing, but this is how I start off all of my presentations. I try to start with some ground rules because working with college students, that's my background. I worked in higher education for almost 20 years. And what I learned is that when you enter a conversation assuming that we're all on the same page, it rarely goes the way you think it will. So starting off, I just want to be clear that my frame of reference as a presenter is from working as a career administrator in higher education in the southern and midwestern regions of the United States. I'm also hoping that we can all agree that the point of this is not for me to teach you how to not be racist or biased. That kind of thing doesn't occur in one session. But also that you know that I'm not here to accuse anyone of being racist or biased. This really is an open conversation where I'm sharing some ideas that I think are important. I will also assume that everyone here is a good person, so we can just let that go. No, there is no judgment here. You do not have to feel like you need to defend yourself or your humanity as I say things that may or may not resonate with you or sound like things you may have seen or heard from yourself or family members or friends. I am assuming that we are all going to remember that we are safe and not in any danger, even when we feel uncomfortable. The way our emotions work, sometimes you can't differentiate between discomfort and feeling attacked. So just know that at no point is it my intention or anyone else's, hopefully, to attack you during this presentation. And with that being said, let's be willing to be uncomfortable. It does not mean that bad things are happening just because we are being challenged. It just means that we are being challenged. I, as a presenter, and I hope that you as well, will be honest in a way that prioritizes honesty, not what people will think of us. So sometimes I might say things that may feel like, ooh, did she just say that? Yes, I did. And I said it because it is my truth, or the truth as I understand it. Let's see. Let's resist the urge to get defensive. Let's share and consider examples of our own behavior. It's really easy to sit in a session like this and think of all the other people who should be here and all the things that you wish someone else heard. It's a lot harder to sit and really be self-reflective on ways that this is connecting with our own behavior. And then lastly, we will give grace. And by giving grace, I am not suggesting that you should allow someone to demean you and then say, but I'm going to give you grace. Unfortunately, that's what grace has turned into, but that's not what I mean when I say it. When I say we will give grace, I personally will give grace for your emotions. If you do feel frustrated, if you get angry and you act out in that anger, I will give you grace and understand that for a lot of people, this particular topic is personal and emotional. And so I will give you that grace, and I hope that you will give each other that grace as well. Okay, so now, topic at hand. Even though the title is Diversity of Thought is not enough, truthfully, that's the point. That is why we encourage diversities, because that's what we're seeking. We are seeking diversity of thought and diversity of experiences. And unfortunately, what I have found is that a lot of times whenever someone uses the phrase diversity of thought, they are using it to explain why there is no other form of diversity present in the room. And so it's like, well, it doesn't matter that we're all women. We have diversity of thought. Okay. Well, how about if you tried, you might interact with people from different races, genders, socioeconomic backgrounds who have different perspectives and will also have diversity of thought. So if diversity of thought is always the goal, and I'm not here to tell you not to care about diversity of thought, why are we here? We're here for part of the reason I just stated. Diversity of thought generally, unfortunately, has become somewhat of a cop-out. So when everyone around the room feels comfortable with each other, You might say, you know, that Jane, she's really too opinionated, but she's really good at what she does. And what that usually means for Jane is that even though she's going to continue to annoy most people, she will also continue to keep her job, continue to be allowed to get opportunities to be successful, because whoever is making the decision that she's really good at her job is also making a decision that they relate to her enough in a way that they trust that they will allow her to continue to kind of get on people's nerves. But when you say it in the reverse, you know, they're good, but I'm tired of always having to answer all these questions. Or they're good, but they always have a why this or a why that. Well, when we talk about those people, generally, those people are very different from us. And those people turn out to not really be a good fit for the culture. It's not that they are not also bringing a diversity of thought. They're bringing a diversity of something else that's making us uncomfortable, that we haven't quite put our finger on, or we have put our finger on it and we would never say it out loud. And that's why we say they're just not a good fit for the culture. So the reason I say diversity of thought is not enough is because we rarely accept diversity of thought when it comes from people who have different race, age, gender, ability level, or, you know, insert whatever difference makes you the most uncomfortable. So for example, I used to work directly with students who had disabilities. And when you interact with a person with a disability, first of all, most of us don't, at least in the United States. Having a disability has become this othering that in addition to being different, we also want to put you in different places. And I'm not even just talking about the different parking spaces, right? It's different classrooms, different groups of friends, different approaches to every single thing. And so by the time a person goes to college, it is very rare to have a person in your classroom as a professor or as a student who has a disability. Because at that point, most people are just glad that they have made it to wherever they've made it to, and you encourage them to get a job doing something pretty simple, whether or not they actually have capacity to do more. So when you interact with students in a college setting who have disabilities, a lot of times they're advocating for themselves because the space is really not designed for them. So they're saying, well, this doesn't work for me in this classroom, or the bathroom really isn't, it's hard for me to use the bathroom, and so it takes me 30 minutes to go between classes rather than the 5 or 10 that you're saying it should take. And I'll share a story. When I worked at one campus, we had a very vocal student in a wheelchair. And the bathrooms were just, the doors were just not wide enough for the wheelchair. And so in response, a specific bathroom was redesigned so that a person in a wheelchair would be able to use it. Unfortunately, that bathroom was put on the second floor, because the persons making the decision didn't make the decision based on what would be best for this person or even with this person in mind. They made the decision based on money. And the easiest bathroom to retrofit was the one on the second floor. So now this student who is complaining that they are having to take extra time just to go to the bathroom still has to take extra time just to go to the bathroom because they had to go to the elevator, go to the second floor, and, you know, God forbid anything ever happened with the electricity or with the elevator, go to that bathroom and then make their way back to class. And so that's what I mean when I say diversity of thought isn't enough, because this person was absolutely bringing a diversity of thought, but it was a diversity of thought that we didn't really want. And I say we because I was a part of the administration. Not to say that I advocated for that second floor bathroom, because I actually argued quite a bit about that. But I was still a part of, at the end of the day, the decision-making team. And so this person, though, became labeled as a complainer, not as an advocate. And when we had someone who applied for a position on our campus, of course, I'm not saying any names or anything like that because that would be terrible. We had an applicant who was in a wheelchair, and someone said, oh, are they going to be a complainer like so-and-so? And the thought process, even though, it sounds terrible as I recount this story, the thought process is very natural. Because if you've not been around very many people with disabilities and the first and or only one you have come in contact with was complaining a lot, then you make the assumption that the reason they were complaining is because of that thing that is different about them. But if all the people in the room had been in wheelchairs, no one would associate those complaints. First of all, no one would have called them complaints. It would have been advocacy. And secondly, no one would have associated that advocacy with that thing that quote unquote makes them different. But when we are all the same, it becomes very easy to just focus on the humanity and not try to attach extra definitions. I'll give another example. I am a Black woman. Full disclosure, sorry, I probably should have said that at the beginning. But I am. So I used to be the national director of this organization called the Black Female Development Circle. And everyone around the table most often was a Black woman. So when I would have a great idea, because all of my ideas are great, but I would have a great idea and people didn't really connect with it, or they didn't like it, or we had an exchange back and forth. At no point did I assume that the reason they were not agreeing with me was because I was Black or because I was a woman, because they were all Black women. So I could throw that out the window. So what I came to the conclusion was that maybe I need to present my idea differently, or maybe it really is just not as good of an idea as I thought it was. But if I'm in a room where I'm the only Black woman, then sometimes when people disagree with me, it might become very easy for me to think that the reason they're disagreeing with me is because of this thing that is different. And truthfully, sometimes that is the reason they are disagreeing with me, because it's not just that my idea is different, but my idea is different in this different packaging that wasn't expected. And, God forbid they think that I'm just there for the quota. Well, then the only reason I'm supposed to be there is to be Black and to be a woman. I'm not supposed to be there to be thinking and talking and disagreeing, right? So this is the reason why we have to get past this scapegoat of, well, as long as we have diversity of thought, everything is fine. Because if all we have is diversity of thought and no other kind of diversity, there is a major problem occurring. So, we don't want to be canceled, right? No, I certainly don't. We don't want to be canceled for saying the wrong thing once or twice or over the course of our entire lives when it's documented and all of that. But that is essentially what we do when someone is different and they enter a space and they bring in their version of diversity of thought. We think that their diversity of thought is just them not being a team player or not being a good fit for the culture. And then that person, maybe they aren't a good fit for the culture, but that person then becomes the reason why no one else who looks like them or is different like them would likely be a good fit for the culture, because we associate the thing we didn't like with the thing that we can see the fastest. Is this making sense? Or am I just boring you to tears? Okay. I'm not going to stop, but no, I'm just kidding. So now, went through all of that. Why is this a problem for you as a leader? Well, first, individuals with historically marginalized identities are less likely to get the opportunity to recover from their mistakes. And if you are one of those individuals, wouldn't you like the opportunity to recover from a mistake? If we have everyone around, it's not, so when we talk about equity and inclusion, we're like, oh yes, let's give everyone an opportunity to try. Yes, let's do that. Let's also give everyone an opportunity to fail. Because when people who are different fail, we assume it must be because they didn't have the merit in the first place. But when people who look and think just like us fail, we assume, well, life happens, mistakes happen. Let's give them another go. So when people are talking about being inclusive, they're not just saying, include me, let me sit here, and as long as I don't ruffle any feathers, you'll let me stay. It's let me be here, be myself, be different, maybe, possibly, make a mistake here and there, and recover the same way everyone else in the room has. Number two, it's really easy to convince a leader. If you're the CEO or the CFO or the top dog manager, whatever your title may be, it's easy to convince you if you've not actually had any interaction with the person who is, quote, the problem, that they are the problem based on their merit and not based on anything else. If you've not done your own deep dive in understanding what bias and microaggressions and marginalization actually looks like. Because the person who brings you the file and says, these are all the things this person has said and done, and simply based on merit, they are not a good fit, you're going to say, great, thank you for doing your due diligence, let's get rid of them. If you don't have enough, I won't say enough, if it doesn't even occur to you to say, well, could it be something else going on here? Could it be that maybe you just didn't connect well with that person, or they made you uncomfortable, or they intimidated you, or you were always nervous when they entered the room because when they entered the room, you assumed they were going to be a problem, or you assumed they only entered the room because there was a quota, which, by the way, most places don't have quotas anymore. They have proven not to work. And a person can really easily abuse a quota, just kind of like as a sidebar. If you need, if you have to hire at least one Black woman to build a bridge, if you just want to abuse the quota, you could hire me. I have no skill or ability to build a bridge. And so then you hire me to build the bridge, and then I do it terribly. And you can say, see, that's what's wrong with quotas. So most places don't do that anymore. This way? Oh, sorry. I was getting a little confident, getting away from the podium. But in any event, so when you have those people who are, different, maybe explore why is it that their version of different is so bothersome to the person who is bringing you the file. Ask the person, do they have a file on everyone else that looks just like that? I've sat in plenty of rooms where I've heard conversations about someone who is just, oh my goodness, everyone hates talking to them. They send other people to talk to that person because they're just so hard to talk to. But then when you have a person who has some type of representative difference, who has a similar, maybe not the exact same, but a similar way of kind of rubbing people the wrong way, well, it becomes people's mission to get rid of that person. Why? Either we should get rid of all those people because we don't really value that in our culture, or we need to explore why we will accept that in our culture from some people, but not from everyone. So as a leader, I'm encouraging you to really do some of that homework. Learn about microaggressions, learn about bias, not because you are a bad person or because you think you may be doing it, but because you want to make sure you're interrogating everyone who reports to you to make sure that they also know how and why they are making decisions. So even though most of the positional leaders are not going to be the person to interact with whoever is being accused of not being a good fit, if that person actually was experiencing some form of bias and they have documentation of it and then they decide to sue, the positional leader is the one who is going to have to answer for it. So that is the reason why you also want to make sure that you know without a shadow of a doubt, or you have a lot of confidence that bias and other forms of discrimination are not happening, because at the end of the day, your name is going to be the one on the front of the newspaper. And your history of doing or not doing anything is going to be what is going to be splashed before everyone, not the hiring manager that you trusted. And then the leader, you, I'm assuming, gets canceled, not because they made a mistake and didn't ask the right question, but because they didn't even know enough. And it's obvious that they didn't know enough to know that there was a problem in the first place. And that is what is being judged. If you can't even see the bias happening, that is what you are being judged for, because the assumption, fair or not, is that you don't see the bias because it doesn't apply to you, because you don't care, because maybe you agree with it. And those are all the things you do not want to have to figure out in public the first time someone decides to document all the times they were discriminated against. So it's really important to not just rest on, well, we don't need to, bring in all this diversity because we have diversity of thought. Because maybe you don't have as much diversity of thought as you think you do on the topics that matter, or on the topics that are going to get you on the first page or the front page of the paper, above the fold, no less. Just so many problems, but this is it, I promise. The reactive statements, the "we hear you, we got it wrong, but we're going to do better," they're not doing what they used to do. They used to be effective because they were new, and for a long time, no one would ever admit a mistake. And then this one time, someone did admit a mistake, and everybody was like, "Wow, someone can admit a mistake. We trust you. We thank you." Well, now everyone is admitting mistakes, and now it's not good enough anymore. It's the same thing with if you have a spouse or a partner, a best friend, a child, a parent, whatever. They punch you in the face every day and then apologize afterwards. Probably not going to believe the apology. Or we can make it, less violent. My apologies. They forget your birthday every year and then apologize. Or they forget this one thing that's super important to you and then apologize consistently. The apology just doesn't have the effect. So now people are not interested in your reactive apology. What people are interested in, particularly millennials and Gen Z, they want to know who you are. Not just what you think, but who are you? How do you behave? So for baby boomers and a lot of Gen X too, the trick was, it doesn't matter what I think of you as long as I'm nice to you, as long as I treat you with respect. So if I am a person who hates individuals with 4 fingers, and then I meet a person who has 4 fingers, but I smile at them and they never know that deep down I never liked them, I can pat myself on the back because I never made them feel bad. Well, for a long time, that was the way to do it, and that was important because we just didn't talk about things that were uncomfortable. I was even trained in that way. Coming up in my, especially working with college students, I interact with college students I don't agree with all the time. And I would brag about the fact that it doesn't matter if I don't agree with them, I'm going to always treat them with respect, which is still very important. The difference though now is that people are less willing to allow you to not agree with certain things. You don't get to not agree with my race. You don't get to not agree with my gender. You don't get to not agree with my sexual orientation, my gender identity. You don't get to really not agree with my humanity. I don't want to be tolerated. Is that a compliment? Like, oh my gosh, my best friend tolerates me the best. We want to be, as human beings, all of us, we want to be appreciated. We want to be included. So if I meet this person with 4 fingers and I have this arbitrary hatred of people with 4 fingers, I can now maybe use this as an opportunity to understand that I shouldn't just hate people because of the number of fingers they have on their hand. And where did that come from in the first place? Did somebody with 4 fingers poke me in the eye? Did they scare me? If that's the case, let me deal with that. Let me deal with the hurt that I am continuing to carry, not attach that hurt to every single person who reminds me of that thing. And I certainly shouldn't just rely on the idea that I don't know a lot about these people and I don't need to know a lot about these people as long as I smile at them. Because that's an energy that can be picked up on. And that is now what people are using, that information, that behavior. People are using that information to decide if they want to work with you at all. Will they even apply at your company if they don't believe what you believe? Will they be willing to purchase from your restaurant or storefront or website or whatever if they think the CEO has problematic views? Not the person they're actually going to interact with in the store or who's going to be their boss, but the actual leader. They want to know what that person believes in real time, every day, most of the time. So I'm not a fan of cancel culture because I'm an educator, and I feel like a lot of us enter into situations where we didn't know, and then we learn, and our opinion or our knowledge evolves. I think that should be allowed. But the reason why cancel culture can be effective is because you have too many people who are unwilling to learn, who are unwilling to admit or acknowledge that maybe there are some things they didn't know that now that they do know, they're willing to move forward and change. Pulling a tweet, which, I look young, but I'm older now. There wasn't Twitter when I was really young and really stupid. So I'm glad of that. But pulling a tweet from someone 10 years ago and using that as the reason to never work with them is unfortunately something that's happening, but it's happening because there are not enough people today doing more than just saying, I'm sorry I was like that 10 years ago, without being able to show through their behavior that they are no longer like that. That is the difference. Yes, I believed that thing 10 years ago. I said it and I meant it. And now I'm ashamed because I know more. Or I'm not even ashamed, but I acknowledge that I know more and I think differently now. And then make the request for grace to let me prove it to you every day that I no longer believe those things. Not because I can write a nice email, but because you can see it in my behavior. So now what? You got all the problems. Hope you wrote them down. Hope you're going to avoid them for the rest of your life. But what do you do now? Well, first, let's stop saying we don't see color or gender, or unless you legitimately have some type of ocular degeneration or something's wrong with you. Let's stop using that as like a compliment. Like, well, I don't care if you're purple or green. First of all, you should, because if I'm purple, I need medical attention. So that's one thing. Secondly, I am not asking to be invisible. I don't mind. In fact, I am glad you can see exactly what color I am. I'm not asking for you to not notice that I am a woman. Why would you not see that? What I am asking is that you don't think you know who I am as a human being because you see that I am a Black woman. That you don't think you know exactly how I'm going to respond to a situation, or my intellectual capacity, or my willingness to connect with different human beings simply based on what you see. In the same way that you don't want anyone to look at you and think they know everything about you, right? That is what people are asking for. No one is asking to be invisible. Don't pretend like you don't see a person with a disability. Ask them if they need help, and if they say they don't, then don't give it to them. Because that is what becomes frustrating. If this is very specific to people with disabilities, but if a person with a disability is working really hard to prove that they can do it on their own, or they have worked really hard to be independent and self-sufficient, you running over to rescue them because it will make you feel better is not helpful. So ask and accept the answer, which is a sidebar, but I'm going to take it. When you ask someone a question, it's important that you accept the answer. So a lot of people have been having these conversations, like Black women don't like it when you touch their hair. So now people feel like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to ask, can I touch your hair? So that I'm not one of these weird people who just walks up and pets you like you're an animal. Well, if I say no, accept the answer. I'm not required to allow you to touch my hair simply because you were nice enough to ask. Because we're two human beings having a conversation, right? You asked the question, I answered it. Move forward, as I will, or I'll probably move backwards away from you. In any event, we want to make sure that we are embracing individuals as individuals. And I included embrace this concept of cultural humility, because cultural competency is separate and it's important, it's understanding, learning more about different cultures. But cultural humility is essentially saying, I will never know enough about your culture to act with confidence as if I know who you are simply based on your culture. So I am a Christian by faith. I have friends who are Muslim, I have friends who are Jewish. They've invited me to really important gatherings in their culture and their faith. I feel like I know a little bit about those two religions. Cultural humility is, even though I have friends who are insert whatever, And I've participated in these functions, and I feel like I know. Cultural humility is saying that I will never walk up to a Muslim person and just tell them who they are or tell them what's important to them simply because I've had some experiences. It's every individual I interact with is different, and I will respect that difference, and I will learn from them or not, and moving forward. Take the lead, right? Which was also on the other slide, but I forgot to say it. As a leader, don't be afraid of this thing called reverse racism, that if you focus on diversity of all the things, well, now you're really moving forward with something called reverse racism. First of all, that is not a real thing. There's no such thing as reverse racism. The reverse of racism is, drum roll, fairness. Okay? If you are a white person who is discriminated in hiring or any other way, discriminated against in any other way, simply based on your race, then you have experienced racism. We don't have to come up with a new name for it just because it happened to you. The other thing that the phrase reverse racism suggests is that you believe racism is supposed to happen to certain people. And when it happens to you, well, now it's something new. So, no, we don't believe that, do we? Of course not. So, if you're a white person who is experiencing racism, you have experienced racism. But what people talk about when they say reverse racism is they do talk about kind of this focus on increasing diversity. And I'll share another personal example. I was teaching a course called Women in Politics. And we were talking about different countries that have had a lot of women leaders and then countries that have not. So fun fact, well, now I'm going to get it wrong because I'm nervous, so never mind. But at the time, Rwanda had a woman president, and I was teaching in the United States of America that still has never had a woman president. And we're having this conversation and talking about like what could some of the differences be, particularly in a developed nation and all these things. And I had a male student who talked about how it was really making him uncomfortable because he had a personal experience where he had run for or he had a position on a school board. In his county, it wasn't an election, it was appointed. And he had a position, and when it came time for renewal, his position had not been renewed because it was an all-male board, and they wanted to add a woman. And so he felt like by them adding that woman, his opportunity had been taken away. And he was frustrated with this woman who took his spot. And so I asked him, I said, okay, I was like, well, that's one way to look at it. But at any point, have you ever been frustrated with all the other men who took your spot? If there's 7 positions, and there's 6 men and 1 woman, why are you upset with the 1 woman for being someone who people thought might bring a diverse perspective, but not have any opinion at all about those 6 men, any of whom could have stepped down so you could keep your spot? So that's what happens when we start thinking about diversity as something that's just like, okay, well, it's a quota and it's giving people things they don't deserve. We just completely ignore why we got to this point, why anyone is even thinking about bringing in diversity in the first place. Another personal story, I was on a board, right? So I was on a United Way board in the county where I was living. And I come in and someone says to me, and they are being very genuine and very nice, and they're so excited to finally be on a board that is diverse, because I was on it. I was one of 2 people of color and one of 3 women, the only black person on the board. The other person of color, if you just looked at them, you wouldn't, I guess you call that racially ambiguous. They looked white, but they were not, or at least they did not identify as white. And so I laughed internally. I did not laugh in this person's face. But then I asked the question, I said, so how are we defining diversity? Because bringing 1 person of color in a room does not make it diverse. And unfortunately, a lot of people are not aware of that. If you have a room that only has 1 person who is different, you are still in a room that is not diverse. And so having this idea or this thought process that we're just going to grab a person who looks differently, and again, as long as they think like us, because we don't really accept diversity of thought from people who look different, then now we've done our job and we've done our part. We don't need to continue to try. And what I'm suggesting to you is we can focus on merit all day. That's fine, because there are lots of people who of different races, genders, ability levels, socioeconomic backgrounds, all those things who have merit. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. We also need to stop including the word qualified on our diversity postings. We are looking for qualified women, qualified people of color. At what point are you not looking for people who are qualified? You don't have to add the qualifier that these, when we bring in the different people, they are going to be qualified. Because when you add that, what you're also acknowledging is that most people believe, most people believe that people who are different are not qualified, and they are just there for diversity. So the qualifications part is the minimum. And we are looking for people who can bring in diverse perspectives that we are assuming, yes, and I get that this is a generalization and an assumption, but we're assuming that some of that difference will be because their life experience is also different. So I think this is my last one. Let's not focus on the business case for diversity as like our champion. There's nothing wrong. The business case for diversity is real. And I'm not saying there is no business case for diversity. Of course, there is a business case for diversity. But if that is the only thing that sells you, then that is also kind of problematic because, again, I'm from the United States. There was a business case for another form of diversity a long time ago that started the Civil War. So only seeing people as an opportunity to make you profit is not a compliment. In addition to the business case for diversity, we also need to be willing to wrestle with the real human case for diversity, because there are so many people who have a lot to offer that have not been given opportunities to share that, or only get one opportunity, and then the minute they make you slightly uncomfortable, you got to get rid of them, anybody who looks like them or reminds you of them, right? So my final thoughts. When we talk about being inclusive, when we talk about bringing more people in, when we talk about allowing for diversity of thought that also happens to come in a body that is diverse, we need to make sure we're allowing those people to come in and be whole human beings. Meaning, what emotions are we willing to accept from women, from men, from people of color? I know I personally have all the emotions, but there have been times when I have been at work and I have felt like, well, if I let them know I'm angry, that's the end of that. Or if I cry, that's going to confuse people way too much. Or if I show too much excitement, because I told you I've been kind of alluding to the fact that I'm not young. I've said it also, but I look young. And so if I'm too excited working with college students, too fun, then it reminds people that at least in their mind, I'm too young to be in a position. And I've had many positions, everything from coordinator to vice president at a college. It's one thing to be a coordinator and look young at a college. It's a whole other thing to be a vice president at a college and walk into a room and have people so fixated on how you got there that they can't hear anything you're saying. So we really want to make sure that we are not only wanting to express our full emotions, but will we allow other people to express theirs? And that's a real question too. You don't have to allow every emotion. At Disney, you are not allowed to be angry at Disney. And that has nothing to do with diversity. That's their culture. You have to be happy, you have to be helpful. But if you're not trying to be at the Disney level of happy and helpful, then maybe it could be useful to allow your staff to sometimes get frustrated with you and not assume that it's a form of disrespect, or not assume that they can't handle themselves or they're unprofessional. Maybe they're just having a human experience. And then would you be willing to offer grace to someone who you truly just don't understand where they're coming from? I'm not saying that because, you know, we want everyone to offer us grace. I call you by the wrong name. Oh, please forgive me. I use the wrong pronoun. Oh, I'm so sorry. Don't make a big deal out of that. But are we willing to exchange that grace, right? Are we willing to not to remove that necessity from that person? Oh my goodness, I used the wrong pronoun. I should do better. Not force them to accept what feels very demeaning and dehumanizing. I'll give one small, I think this is a quick story. I'll make it quick. I've been a chief diversity officer at a couple campuses, and once I brought in a speaker who was gender nonconforming and used the pronouns they, them. And this was years ago, so they, them was still fairly new, and it's not that I didn't respect it, I just wasn't trying hard enough, to be honest. I would mess it up, I called them him, and then I would be very dramatic and say, oh no, not he, not him, they, that, you know, I was really, you know, making a mess of the whole thing. And it kept happening, and I kept apologizing until at some point during the day, they stopped using she, her pronouns with me, and they only used they, them pronouns. The first time they referred to me as they, I was like, did I just, what? The second time, I got a little annoyed. I was like, are they doing this on purpose? In my, you know, in my mind. The third time, I was like, oh my God, they are doing this on purpose, and this is exactly how they have been feeling all day. And miraculously, I stopped having an issue using they, them pronouns because it became important enough for me to try. So those are the kinds of things that I am trying to encourage with this bigger picture than just, oh, as long as we have diversity of thought, because generally it means that we're really not interested in feeling uncomfortable or being around people who offer a different kind of diversity. So I think that is, yeah, that's all I have. Thank you so much. And I came in under the minute. So if you would like to connect, this is my contact information. I will be honest, I'm not all that active on Twitter, but I am still on it. Getting more active on LinkedIn, and of course, you can always email me, reach out directly with any questions, comments. If you want to argue, that's fine too. I'm actually not conflict averse. My dad was a real weirdo, so I learned how to have arguments. Seriously, because we're done now. Like he stopped someone in the grocery store in the 10 items or less line because their kid asked for a pack of gum. He was like, ma'am, that's 11. I was like, oh my gosh. It has become one of my favorite stories, but at the time I was so embarrassed. But I learned a lot of lessons from him. Anyway, I'll argue with you is the point. And I will not call you names because I don't do that. So I hope this was helpful. I hope you got something out of it. Thank you so much. Is that it?